while I was doing your research on you as well as during our initial call, you often said that understanding the hiring manager really makes all the difference.
Yes. I joke around with my clients and say that hiring is being able to walk into a store and not just ask for the best shoes, but really understanding the fit, the event. What are you really using the shoes for? What's the piece of the puzzle that is missing? Sometimes I'm the one who tell the hiring manager, hey, it might take us a little longer. This is why. But for them to setting those expectations and having clear communication, they appreciate it. And they're like, that's okay.
Wow, I think a great distinction that you are bringing, that you need to see the lay of the land, what you are focusing on. If you are managing a smaller client, a startup,
the human element, somebody that is going to listen, go in, understand your business. And it's hard to replicate with ChatGPT.
And I follow a process where I want to work with clients who are more interested in me and my ability rather than me being interested in them, because it has to be a win-win.
So being able to say no when it doesn't feel right. And especially again, like, as I said, I have a guarantee. So if the person doesn't work out within the 90 days, that's me replacing the person.
Today's conversation is a reminder that recruiting isn't just about finding candidates. It's about understanding people, building trust, and becoming a strategic partner to your clients. In a market where technology can screen resumes in seconds and AI can automate countless recruiting tasks, the real differentiator is still the human judgment. The recruiters who create lasting value are the ones who understand the business behind the job description. That's what we are exploring today. I am Rahul Karan Sharma, the host of Staffing Truth, and we bring conversation with leaders who challenges conventional thinking and share the lessons shaping the future of staffing. Joining me today is Laura McDonough, founder and managing director of L Rose Recruiting. Laura partners with small and medium sized businesses, helping them hire with confidence by becoming an extension of their leadership team rather than simply another recruiting partner. Laura believes that successful recruiting starts long before sourcing candidates. It begins with understanding the hiring manager, the culture, and what success truly looks like beyond what's written on a job description. Laura, welcome to the Staffing Truth. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. When we were having our initial conversation, your journey really stood out for me, that you are not coming from a core staffing background per se, but you pivoted to start your own recruiting company. So tell us, what inspired you to build a recruiting firm focused on that small to medium business enterprises rather than just filling a simple positions? You focus on being a true partner. Share your journey.
Yes. So in 2020, I was the talent acquisition manager for an amazing tech company here in the Orlando area that developed a software for hotels. Due to COVID, hotels were highly affected. So unfortunately, yes, some layoffs, but I was lucky enough to stay on as a contractor. And I didn't know it at the time, but they became my very first client. It was kind of a snowball effect as somebody referred me to another company. And I quickly realized that one, I was very passionate about working with growing businesses, but also I didn't think growing businesses should have to choose between hiring great talent and staying within budget. So either spending their budget on an internal recruiting resource or partnering with traditional staffing agencies. So I didn't wake up one day and said, this is what I want to do. It was very organic and a lot of feedback, honestly, from clients as well, and working with different leaders. So I am very lucky now to work with a small group of clients within the Orlando area or that have ties to Orlando, which I love because I get to go on site a lot. I know in this, I love working remotely. I think it's a huge advantage, for your lifestyle. But I do love to be on site to meet new hires. I always go with pastries on day one and really just build those relationships. I honestly think trust is built one hire at a time. I never go in when I have a new client and just tell them what to do, how to do it, even if it's recruiting related, right? Sometimes I even try their way and then come back be like, I think we can do it better this way. But after one, two, three, several hires, then they value your input. Yesterday I was just at one of my clients' site at their headquarters, and I said hi to one of my first hires there, and we're joking around. I was like, "You're the reason why I get to come back and hire more and more people, because having that level of quality of hire and really thinking long term. It's never for me about making the placement. And again, because my background is in corporate recruiting, that was my employer before, and I'm just trying to replicate what I did as a talent acquisition manager with these other companies. But I was telling him, I was like, thank you so much for really helping me build my business. Because it's, once they see again the value that a great hire can make within an organization, then it's easy just to reach out every time they have a new position.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I understand that your love towards recruiting is very well resonated in your talk. The passion is very much visible. And I know that would be one of the key differentiator of what you bring on table to the client. So thank you for sharing your story. I also noticed that while I was doing your research on you, as well as during our initial call, you often said that understanding the hiring manager really makes all the difference. So, why is that the foundational, or why understanding the hiring manager is core for our recruiting business?
Yes. I joke around with my clients and say that hiring is kind of, I call it shoe science, right? It's being able to walk into a store and not just ask for the best shoes, but really understanding the fit, the event, what are you really using the shoes for? So the hiring managers it's a piece of the puzzle. I go into a new client, but even for every new position, depending on who the position reports to, understanding the culture as a whole, then the hiring manager, and then the position itself. So there are different layers that makes a great hire, because somebody great for the organization might not necessarily work perfectly for one specific hiring manager. A lot of times, I think this guidance is very important because we tend to like people that are similar to us. And a lot of hiring managers tend to hire people that are very similar to them. And then you just ended up with a team of clones, right? So I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
important to define those non-negotiables, those values, those personal characteristics. I have a client where it's really big on grit, resilience, hardworking. But then when it comes to, again, for example, hiring for a specific team, what do we already have and what is going to complement that team? So not necessarily hiring, again, the same person, but figuring out what are we missing? What are we lacking? What is going to make the team even stronger? And I think that's approach that has worked really well, and being able to kind of stop before we even begin the search and talk through
Mm,
these different points. I think it's very helpful going in. And then even using tools, I use the predictive index or principal U, those behavioral assessments, not to make a hiring decision, but to put it on paper, black and white, like this is
mhm,
what we have now. What's the piece of the puzzle that is missing? What is going to
mm.
complement that particular team?
I really like your thought about hiring manager hiring their own clones. In my experience, I have noticed that they either hire their clones or they hire someone who is not as good as them. Versus the other way around, I think a hiring manager should be hiring the smartest person, someone who is smarter than them, so that their team can become better. So when you said that, it was just music to my ears that hiring managers are hiring clones. Now, another aspect that what stood out for me when we were having our discussion is about your routine of weekly check-ins with your client CEOs. What those conversations have shared with you that probably you do not see in the job description?
Yeah. I mean, even what we were just talking about, not hiring clones, all came from a conversation with a CEO. And I was just sharing, we talk about everything. I was sharing with him that my husband and I just had our 16th wedding anniversary. And we were joking around about how my husband and I could not be more different. And I have a high sense of urgency. He's a very laid back procrastinator. I'm very organized. My car is spotless and it makes me anxious if it's not. He has so much stuff. I want to go into the details in his car for work and the kids. And you get a picture, right? Like we're just very, very different, but we have been together for 16 years because it works. Meaning, yes, I think it drives me crazy sometimes, the things that make us different, but it's also part of the reason why it works. Because if I had married somebody like myself, we would probably drive each other even more crazy. And I think there's certain times when, again, for example, making decisions, I'm the one that I'm like, okay, let's make a decision right now because I have the high sense of urgency. My husband is the one that is like, wait a second, sleep on it, which is hard for me to do. But that's what I need. And that's what makes the partnership work. So I was having, again, this conversation with a CEO and he's like, yeah, it makes sense for teams as well. Some of my teams, when I step back and look why they work so well together, is because they are so different in certain aspects. And then I started sharing some examples of when I noticed hiring managers, again, kind of hiring their own clones and the psychology behind it. We just tend to like people similar to us. So even conversations like that and come up just from weekly conversation, weekly check-ins. From my point of view, I feel like I have a leadership council. Sometimes I ask them for business related questions. They give me great ideas. And at the same time, they ask for my opinion on things that are not even recruiting related. And being seen as that partner versus just somebody who's going to forward them resume. I think that's what made such a big difference within the business model and developing these long-term relationship with clients. I have 100% retention. I haven't lost a client since. So starting my company and, but they're all on an ongoing basis, but not by contract. They don't have to call me every time, but it's so easy and it makes so much sense based on their model to have somebody that knows their culture, knows their team. And it's, again, kind of that partnership that is ongoing versus just one position at a time.
Wow. And I think these weekly check-ins is something that you do proactively. It's not something required by your contract to do it. And that I see that as a clear differentiator because you are not just going after asking for more business. You are going as a value-added partner, which client appreciates. And based on your history where you have not lost a client is a testimonial to that.
I think it's part of putting the client's needs first, right? So there was a time when I had a client that thought they needed a VP of operations. And we started walking through the position. And by the end of the call, we realized that the CEO just needed an executive assistant. So when it comes to my fee was a lot less, right? We went from like $100-something thousand to a much, much lower level position, but it made the most sense. And I want them to be able to look back and be like, not just she saved me money, but she really cared about what made sense for the business and what the business needed at that point in time. I feel like, and that's another big difference. And I never, as you mentioned, never worked on the staffing side, but I represent the company. I work for the company. I don't work for candidates. I source candidates and I look for candidates, but my relationship it is with the organization. And that's all I've known. So I think, again, it really helps in seeing the value and knowing that I have their best interests at heart. And for me, it's, again, kind of the long-term success of the organization, because the more successful they are, the more position I'm going to hire as well. But because honestly, I do feel so passionate. I get so excited. I joke around that my new hires are like my children. I go in, I'm like, when I doing these check-ins, I asked, how is this person doing? How's that person doing? And even sometimes when they're struggling on certain things, that we walk it through. Okay, what can we do to help them? So I feel so invested to a fault sometimes, because I remember one time, one of my clients, we had a hire that didn't work out. And it was within the 90-day guarantee. So we replaced the person and he just ended up getting a better offer from his former employer. So it wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I take it very personal. I'm like, I should have sensed the hesitation. Or I talked to her and she's like, Laura, she interviewed with 3 other people. You're not the only one that didn't see this coming. So again, I feel personally invested to, as I said, to a fault, but I think it's important to have somebody that, again, really cares about the business. And because I do work with these growing small to mid-sized organizations, the company itself is their baby. I work with a lot of founders I work with a lot of people that startups that now are established organizations. And so they care so deeply about their company. So I think they can kind of relate to my passion for recruiting and what it takes to make an organization successful.
Sure. I think this response is also bringing another thought to my mind as to why people quit early, because in the situation, if they would have hired a VP of operation and asking them to do a EA's job, definitely there's a huge misfit, and it would be a lose-lose situation. Now, on that note, I do feel that many candidates, their profiles, their resume looks excellent on paper, but they are the ones, not all of them, they actually do wonders for their clients. So as a recruiter, what do you think, or as a sourcer, that where is the disconnect? Why is something looking great on paper but does not look good in execution?
Yeah. So there are, I think, a lot of things that I try to keep an eye out for. And sometimes this seems like I might shoot myself in the foot and not move a candidate forward when it looks great on paper. And maybe they even do pretty well in the interview, but sharing those pink flags. I've had a candidate who I was just checking when you're sourcing candidates on LinkedIn, you can just click on post and comments, right? And you can just very quickly see their communication online. And I had a candidate that just looked so well on paper, and it was a very tough position to find somebody that met all those requirements. But just the way he talked to people online, it was so aggressive, condescending. I was like, I just can't imagine this person being a good cultural fit. Another time, just the way another candidate was communicating with one of my recruiters, I just didn't like that. So I had an interview scheduled. So we went along with the interview, and it was actually a really good interview. So, but those behind the scenes, when I let the hiring manager know, I said, look, this is this person's background. They actually did really well. I do think they could be a good fit, but this is my pink flag. This is how they communicated with the recruiter. I just want you to have all the information. And again, I would rather not hire somebody now that hire somebody that's 6 months, 9 months into the role. They show their real self and not work out. So again, I think keeping an eye out for those little things and be very transparent with the hiring manager. And again, it goes all back to really wanted the company to succeed and having their interests at heart. Because sometimes people, I think when you're on a traditional staffing agency side, it's such a big price tag. And I think it's not just the money side, but KPIs, the pressure that recruiters in a traditional staffing agency setting, sometimes not in every single one, but might have to fill positions to keep their own job, to meet their goals. So I think there is a lot more pressure to hire and hire quickly versus sometimes I'm the one who tell the hiring manager, hey, it might take us a little longer. This is why. But for them to setting those expectations and having clear communication, they appreciate it. And they're like, that's okay. I would rather take an extra week or two to find a great fit than just hiring now and not have that long-term success for that particular hire.
So what I'm listening is keep attention to all those communication, whether it's an email communication, verbal communication, till the last process, because they may give you some clues that could be detrimental for the client. And you are keeping your client's best interest as well as the employee's best interest. So recruiters, if you're listening and if you are having the situation that why your great hires or why your candidates do not work out, look on to these signals which they may be giving you as cues, but probably you may be missing on them because of those KPIs or that pressure, as Laura was talking about. Now, on the other hand, since I know you are big on meeting with candidates, you are big on meeting with your clients. So if I have to flip that question, let's say there is a candidate whose paper resume does not look good, but you still meet him or her for a coffee meeting. Has there been a situation where things have turned around, where your initial impression based on looking at the resume, but versus after meeting them changed?
Oh, yes. And I think that's where good recruiter really provides that value. I was just a couple weeks ago meeting at one of my clients' headquarters, and one of the new hires just had their 90-day check-in, and we were laughing with the hiring manager because she told him, I didn't share it with him directly, but she told me, she's like, hey, Laura's the one who pushed for you. Because once I got the resume, I was like, I'm not so sure. And I was like, trust me, worst case scenario, you wasted an hour of your day. But best case scenario, you have your great hire. I'm telling you, he's the one. And I was so invested in him. I truly believed in him. And she, again, because we have that relationship and that she can see, okay, like she has presented great candidates before. Maybe she knows what she's talking about. She ended up meeting with him. And again, he ended up getting hired and he's a very successful hire. But it's funny because she shared that story with him at his 90 days and he was so grateful. And I was grateful to him. I said, hey, you're the one who made me look good and show the hiring manager, trust me, because it does happen. I had another candidate very recently, kind of funny story. So I take tennis lessons with my girlfriends and I was interviewing for this one particular position all week and it was draining because I kept finding candidates that met the requirements, but I just didn't feel they had the DNA of that company that I was hiring for. I was just 100% sold. I had one candidate I felt good about, but anyhow, so I'm doing my tennis lesson and I'm talking to my tennis instructor and it just came out that he just graduated from college. I was like, no way. I was like, what did he study? And he's like, data analytics and supply chain. And he goes into how passionate he is about data analytics and supply chain. I was like, you got to be kidding. It was like, I'm actually hiring a position that these are the requirements. So he said, let's chat tomorrow. So we do a full interview. And after the interview, I was like, oh my gosh, he's the one. He was the least experienced candidate. Illyria just graduated in May. And so I called the hiring manager and I said, listen, if I send you all the resumes of the candidates I interviewed, you would never think he's our top candidate. But trust me, go into the interview. And if you say, no, we really need somebody more experienced. Long story short, yesterday was his first day. I went to see him at headquarters.
Wow.
He got the job and he was my tennis instructor. And it's funny because all my girlfriends and I felt so invested in the process. They were asking me, how was he doing? Did he get the job? But it's another great example. Again, on paper, you would never think he was going to be the one getting the job. I had candidates who came from exactly the background we were looking for, which was that kind of small manufacturing environment. All those things that, based on the job description, would have picked another candidate for the job. But he really, when the hiring manager talked about somebody, very flexible, adaptable, curious, how they take the initiative to learn things they don't know, like every single thing that the hiring manager, when it comes to those intangibles, that it's not just experience, but those qualities, personality traits that he was looking for. Again, he met every single one of those. So again, very grateful to all the hiring managers. If you're listening, thank you for being open to candidates that sometimes, again, on paper might not look as strong, but really believing in kind of a recruiter's ability to assess those qualities that might not be as appearing on a resume.
Wow. I think you are giving a very perfect example of how recruiters can be a true partner to their client and value-added partner, because just submitting the candidate who looks all good on paper, meet all the skills and criteria is something every recruiter does. But what you are doing differently is ensuring that the candidate meets the DNA, the culture of that company. And you are willing to be bold. You were willing to go beyond the norms for taking a chance on this candidate. And I'm glad that it worked out well, both for your client as well as for the candidate. Very good. Laura, I come from a staffing background where, as you mentioned earlier, the speed to fill, the urgency and the volume is very, very high. And what we have seen is most likely the recruiters, they see the hire when the client says that, okay, they want to get this candidate on board as kind of a finish line. From your experience, what I'm learning is it's very important to do follow up with the candidate, follow up with the hiring manager for the interview, as well as follow up when the candidate starts. Why you think all these things matters a lot for a recruiter?
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly not rocket science. It was really just replicating corporate recruiting and just doing exactly what I was doing before. I was in a building with all the hiring managers, or I worked directly with them on an ongoing basis. So it just kind of came very naturally. And that's when getting those feedback from clients, they're the ones that said, hey, I didn't have that before. This is why it makes sense to work with you, because we really value the partnership. We really value the time that you spend getting to know the hiring managers. And I always say it's not, this is a good model, staffing is not good. I think it just works specifically for this size of growing businesses that need the additional support. Because if you are a staffing agency working with a large organization that has that support, a big HR team, a big recruiting team, they don't need as much handholding, right? But I think for those organizations where especially work directly with leadership, they have so much on their plate, or even HR leaders. I work with companies that don't have an internal recruiting team, but they do have an HR leader. They have so much on their plate. They just don't have as much time and honestly, sometimes interest. Not all HR leaders like to do recruiting. I don't think I would be as successful in an HR role, to be honest. Like, I just really love recruiting. And actually, I started my career as an HR generalist. But I was hiring all the time and I realized recruiting is what, I really enjoy doing. And I believe in making recruiting affordable for growing businesses. So our fees are significantly less than traditional staffing as well. So for them, it's an easy sell to their own leadership because it's like, hey, I'm able to dedicate more time on my day-to-day HR role, which is critical within the organization, and we don't have to break the bank. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And each organization is a little different. Again, I work directly with the CEO. And again, he doesn't have the time to post jobs on Indeed and wait. Also, companies don't have the tools. I think pain points are recruiting is very time consuming. Even if you post a job directly, you're just kind of waiting and hoping that a great candidate is going to show up. You have to screen the candidates. Sometimes I talk to 20 candidates before I submit a couple to a hiring manager. So where that time goes for a leader, it's also not having sourcing tools. Again, to kind of have to post and wait versus actively sourcing candidates and reaching out to people that specifically meet the requirements of the role.
Wow, I think a great distinction that you are bringing, that you need to see the lay of the land, what you are focusing on. If you are managing a smaller client, a startup, what inputs that you are giving will work great. Whereas if you are managing a larger client base where they are already very established, they may not need as much as hand holding as a smaller client. So thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to move on to this great topic around artificial intelligence. We have been talking a lot on the staffing truth, the way AI is changing the landscape in recruiting industry. So from your perspective, where AI is really been a boon for recruiters, and what are some of the human skills that are still required for recruiters that they will always have an advantage in spite of AI tools?
I think in every industry, everyone went so big on AI, this shiny, pretty thing, and that everyone thought was going to solve every problem. It is extremely helpful, even in my day to day recruiting, especially sourcing. I remember I was sourcing for a position. I specifically was looking for people who sold into ambulance services. So when you come to think of the name of the companies, the type of products that ambulance services will buy, within a minute, I had the research done. It would have taken me hours. So there are so many advantages to AI, but you need somebody that can have the right input. So there are a lot of things I think within recruiting. One, again, just using the AI tool, knowing how to use it for recruiting. Two, the human element. Again, somebody that is going to listen, go in, understand your business. And it's hard to replicate with ChatGPT. So I think with AI really comes to understanding how it can integrate within your business and where it can be useful. But so far, what I'm seeing is that it's not going to solve every problem and it's not necessarily going to automate all the recruiting challenges. I've seen just recent articles, a company that was using AI and it was rejecting candidates for the wrong reason, or technology is not perfect yet. I don't know, maybe in 5-10 years, it might be different, but right now, it's not the solution for every problem. So I think there is a human element. I think recruiting teams might not need to be as big. You might not need as many, especially for a large organization, a team of 10 recruiters. You might do the same job with 5. That is true. But at the same time, I don't think, again, going to be able to replicate, for example, when I think of my clients, a CEO or a leader, an executive within one of those organizations is still not going to be able to spend the time and know what kind of input and how to set up a recruiting strategy.
So AI would lead to more lean or leaner recruiting teams in the time to come, as well as there are still the need for those relationship-based recruiters. So I believe that the AI will be able to easily differentiate between those quality recruiters and the regular recruiters. The regular recruiters, I mean, who are just posting and praying, rather than someone who is taking that creative step in sourcing the candidate, speaking with them, getting to know them better, and making sure that they really have a culture fit angle to it before submitting candidates.
I mean,
Right, good.
LinkedIn Recruiter now has a LinkedIn Recruiter Assistant that they
Hmm.
integrated. So again, for if you have a lot of requisitions and you're working on a lot of roles, it is going to save you a lot of time. But again, at the same time, I just read an article about a car manufacturer that brought back a lot of engineers that laid off because they realized that they were having so many mistakes and they needed the human
Hmm.
element. So I think we're going through this phase of being like, okay, wait a second. We were really excited. We thought, hey, it's going to save us all this money and do all these things. And now we're kind of seeing the flaws and again, figuring out how to integrate AI with the human element.
Mm. Laura, if a hiring manager listening to our conversation, if you could give an advice to an hiring manager or maybe a founder before they engage with the recruiters or recruiting partner, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I would say knowing yourself. So doing all that homework before you
Mm.
even post a position. So understanding your culture, what you have to offer, understanding what your shortcomings are. So a lot of times, if you ever or small organization, maybe the growth path or benefits or certain things that maybe a large corporation doesn't provide, but knowing kind of what you can do and what you cannot do. So in knowing yourself really well, knowing your team really well, making sure that again you have a need for an extra position. A lot of times they're like, oh, we need X role. And then it's like, okay, do a gap analysis. Okay, this is the people that we have. These are our needs. I remember one time it was just a matter of identifying an underutilized resource that could take on some of the responsibilities that they thought was going to be a full-time role. And it wasn't the case.
Mm.
So I think doing the homework and not jumping into recruiting is probably the most impactful aspect of a recruiting strategy.
Wow. What a great input you're giving for a hiring manager, because the solution to every problem is not just hiring someone new, just also identifying you may have someone in-house who may have that talent and who may be more passionate to do that particular task rather than hiring the new person. The other aspect I see in my experience, Laura, that there are so many positions that are open for almost 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and to that matter 6 months. And so from your perspective, does the hiring manager create the shortage of the talent because they are chasing for that purple squirrel? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I think it's very important at the beginning of the search is when we identify those must-haves. Without those three, four, whatever their requirements, this is what we really need to be able to do the job
Mm.
and fill the position. But where can we compromise? Where can be flexible? Can we be flexible? And having this conversation on an ongoing basis. We found, for example, somebody for a controller role that met on paper all the requirements, but then again, it wasn't a cultural fit. So because it's such a hard position based on, again, a long list of things we're looking for, then we came up with a different strategy. Well, somebody that maybe came from this background where there is like a larger pool of candidates would also, be somebody we can train. So it really comes down to one, having conversations at the beginning of the search. And sometimes I do go in looking for that purple squirrel or unicorn, I tend to call them.
Hmm.
But then throughout the process, having those conversations with hiring managers and providing the feedback and say, hey, this is why it's very hard to find people within this particular industry, this skill set, whatever it is. But I think throughout the process, have that ongoing communication, transparent feedback. And I always tell hiring manager, you're not going to hurt my feelings after an interview. Like, tell me all the things. What went
Hmm.
well? What are we missing on? Like, I understand sometimes candidates do really well with me, and then there are certain things that come out during an interview that definitely didn't come up with me. I wouldn't have submitted somebody. So, but tell me so that I understand what those pain points are and where the shortcomings are and what I can focus on. So I think again, having a very honest, transparent relationship and communication with hiring managers is the biggest thing, and being flexible.
Mm.
Sometimes, for example, if the budget is small, well, you have to be a lot more flexible on the requirements. If it's a position that it's a very niche and there are just not that many candidates that comes from this particular industry, or it's an on-site role, or whatever it is, you need to be more flexible. So it goes both ways, but I think again, it really honestly goes back to communication.
And also, I think what I'm hearing is constant feedback, both with the hiring team as well as the people who are interviewing, because sometimes there could be a difference between the thought process of the hiring manager versus the thought process of the person who's interviewing. And that can really make a big difference. So
And
thank you
also,
for sharing that input.
well, of course, and also I would say within the company, sometimes they're not on the same page. So even when we approve the job description, I say, okay, all the stakeholders, so anyone who's involved in the interview process, do they agree on what we're looking for? Because sometimes the hiring manager says this is what we need, and then they interview with a higher level person or whatever there is, and they're like, oh no, they don't have X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, X, Y, and Z was never part of what we're looking for. So not just the hiring manager, but really anyone who has a say, anyone who's involved in the interviewing process, everyone needs to be on the same page. And this needs to be done at the very beginning of the search. Otherwise, that's why sometimes searches take a lot longer because different people have different expectations and think we need something different. So again, having conversations at the beginning throughout the process, but making sure we're all on the same page.
Piggyback on that question, do you think it could be the person who's interviewing could be a challenge? Or in your experience, have you noticed hiring manager doing things unintentionally, which is making the candidate walk away? Any thoughts, any experience of yours?
Yeah, I would say I'm not in the interview. So I can only go by the feedback from the candidates, but there have been times when based on those feedback, and again, it can be very unintentional. It can be not knowing. I mean, I've done trainings on even lawful interviewing questions you can ask versus questions you cannot ask because recruiting is my expertise. They have their own expertise. I cannot do their job. But what I'm dealing with on a daily basis is recruiting, is interviewing. So identifying those gaps and things that maybe they're, as you said, unaware, and coaching and providing feedback, I think it can be very helpful to make sure they stay compliant, but also again that the recruiting process is successful.
Awesome. Well, before we move to our final staffing truth round, Laura, I have this ritual where I ask people in my network questions that they can ask from our guests. They don't know the guest. I just give them the background of the guest, and based on that, I get the question. So I have three questions coming in. The first one is from a recruiter in my network. What's one habit that separates recruiters who become trusted advisor from those who are simply viewed as vendors?
I would say not going in and acting like we know everything, but listening to the client, listening to their pain points, and just spending that time understanding what their particular situation. And even within the same client, within a couple of years, they might experience different challenges. So the same person that worked well 2 years ago might not be the same type of personality they might need now. So I think just really going in and listening and spending time with them, and for them to see that again, you're taking the time, that you have their needs and their success at heart, and just not rush through the process. And again, I would say time to fill it. You might find people that can fill positions faster than me. I can promise you that. But I think retention is what it's even more important to me. It's being able to see those candidates grow within the organization and stay for a long period of time versus just getting the position filled.
I would also add that yes, listening is very, very critical point, but also do not assume what hiring manager is saying. Clarify that, ask questions rather than just going with your assumption, because I have noticed that there are at times people are good listener, they keep taking notes, but then they are assuming a lot of things. So my recommendation would be ask questions as you are getting that time with the hiring manager. Thank you. Another recruiter asked that, how do you identify a great candidate when the resume doesn't immediately stand out? What signals are you looking for beyond what's written on paper?
Couple of things. I would say even their LinkedIn profile, their professionalism, the way they portray themselves, the way they describe their position. If it's always like a we, like what did you do? Sometimes it's taking on chance on people. You might see something there. You might see that I had a candidate who seemed like he was jumping around a lot, but I was like, I feel there is something there. And we ended up having the interview, and it ended up that one was a layoff. The position after that was, no, sorry, before the layoff, the company was acquired. So it really was the same company. It went from one company to another company. And then that company had layoffs. And his following position, he was hired by a hiring manager, his manager. So it was really like 3 or 4 roles that seemed like he had done something wrong. but really was one the same position for a long time. Just the company making changes and getting acquired. And then when it was part of a layoff, really his own manager hired him somewhere else. So he must have done something right. So I think it really comes down to experience. I will be pretty terrible at a lot of jobs, but I've been doing this for 15 years. So I'm like, okay, I can kind of tell there is something there. And just sometimes taking a chance on people that even in the way they communicate with me, they seem just so professional.
Wow. For me, one of the aspects that I always used to share with recruiters is to check on the environment.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you are hiring a candidate who has done amazingly well in a startup kind of environment. Now you are filling a requirement for a client who is a very, very process oriented. Probably you need to see whether they will be able to adapt to that change or not. Sometimes people who are very process oriented, they are not able to adapt in a startup environment, and vice versa. That work environment plays a vital role. And unfortunately, no one talks about this on the resume. Just you as a recruiter, you need to ask those quality questions to get the response. Right, the last question I have from my network is from a sales leader, Laura. What's one mistake staffing sales professional make when trying to win new clients, and what would you do differently?
I don't think I have a sales bone in my body. I just love for my work to speak for itself. So, and that's why, again, I've grown my organization so far mainly through referrals, but really having the ability to, I think those relationships with leaders is what got me the referral, right? Then they hear another leader was hiring. But I think being very transparent with your process, with what you bring to the table, what you're really good at. I had a friend whose dad was an executive for on the automotive side, just hiring mechanics. And he's like, hey, can you try, please, trying to fill the position? So we tried it. And then I realized that we actually ended up extending an offer, but the person ended up not wanting to relocate. But long story short, through the process, I was like, well, that's not my strength. I have been sourcing on LinkedIn for 15 years. I shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel and try to be somebody I'm not. And that taught me a lesson that sometimes I should say no to positions that I've never done before. I give it a try.
Yeah. No, I think I can relate to it as a solo entrepreneur. It's a lot of courage you need to have to say no to your clients. And I follow a process where I want to work with clients who are more interested in me and my ability rather than me being interested in them, because it has to be a win-win. And if they don't have that belief, that trust in my ability, there is no point in having a contract or having association with them, because there will always be those pink flags, as you mentioned. Thank you for sharing that info.
I've had a potential client and just spending time before we even signed the contract with the HR leader, who was a wonderful person, but reading under Glassdoor reviews, asking questions about their turnover, asking questions about leadership. It seemed like the leadership changed their mind a lot. Just like all this again, there were more red flags at that point than pink flags and getting to know the business, where I was the one, although the position they had would have been great, was high level role. I said no. And I took my time. That was one of those things. And my husband was like, don't tell them right away. Don't tell them yes right away. Really think about it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, it just doesn't feel right. And as I said, I would work for any of my clients. I would be one of their employees. And I knew that that was not the case with that particular organization. So being able to say no when it doesn't feel right, and especially again, like, as I said, I have a guarantee. So if the person doesn't work out within the 90 days, that's me replacing the person. And they were actually pushing to extend the guarantee to 6 months because they had such turnover. And I was like, I'm going to be working on this position for a long time.
Sure. Well, before I move to our next segment, I wanted to check one thing. What are some recruiting trends that you are observing in the market that our recruiters should pay more attention to?
I think a lot of it goes back to AI, even in the way not just the way we recruit, but also when it comes to the skill set of the candidates. So, for example, I was talking to a friend who's hiring for a leadership position within software development, and she was trying to find a sweet spot between somebody who can code but doesn't have to, because they know how to leverage AI tools. So, I think that's a big one right now. Also, I actually interview a fake candidate that was using AI One created a fake profile on LinkedIn, which I thought I was doing a really good job vetting those applications because there are tons of fake applications out there, which is insane. The more technical the position is, especially on the tech side, the more you're going to find those. I thought I was doing such a good job. And then I'm interviewing this candidate and I'm just getting this gut feeling. One, I can tell that they're getting all the answers using AI because they're kind of buying their time. I don't think this person is real, like that they
Mm-hmm.
really have that they say who they are. And I ended up asking them what they were in a particular city. I was like, oh, why did you decide to go to that university? And he's like, oh, I grew up here. And I could tell it was not the case. And and then I said, okay, where did you go to high school? I actually had a friend who grew up in the same area, and he just turned off the camera. And I can hear him talk to somebody. And then he comes back and oh my God.
Wow. Amazing, insights on the recruiting trends. One of the aspects that I always see is tech people, since we're talking about technology, and I come from the tech staffing. What I've noticed is tech people, they love to create their own portfolio. So apart from the resume, check on GitHub, check on Google if they have their own web page or a website that will allow you to cross-check the information, and that will allow you to know more about the culture or the background of that candidate to make sure that they are truly fit to from the culture perspective to your clients. So thank you. Laura, anyone listening to us, either a recruiter or a hiring manager, if they like to connect with you and work with you, where they can find you and what is a true differentiator for your company?
Yeah, I pretty much live on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Also, our website is alroserecruiting.com. I would say the biggest differentiator is, again, if you're looking for somebody that can become an extension of your team, that can replicate the corporate recruiting process and standards, and that's what your organization needs. If you need, in addition to just somebody who forwards resume, I do a lot of projects free of charge for my clients. Like somebody had to redesign or actually create a career page, but things that again kind of go beyond just filling the position and getting a resume. I think that's where we really come in and provide a lot of value.
Wow. Well, I'm sure after listening to our episode, they will get a feel of what you do and how you do, and very confident that there will be a lot of LinkedIn requests coming your way, and you will soon become the talk of the Orlando market. Well, now we'll move to our staffing truth round, rather. Short answers, no overthinking, just your instinct, Laura. Okay. One word to describe the staffing industry today.
Fast pace,
Speed or quality, what wins in the long run?
quality
Most overrated KPI in recruiting.
to fill.
Top recruiter always becomes a good leader. Agree or disagree?
That's a tough one. Neither, because it really depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. One thing recruiters should stop immediately.
Relying too much on AI.
Following back on this, AI, is it opportunity or threat?
Definitely opportunity if you know how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
I know its limitations. Say
One trait that destroys leadership credibility.
lack of trust,
Sales driven or candidate driven, what actually works?
candidate driven.
One mindset shift that changed your career.
Hard to say in one word. I would say,
You can go to one
uh,
sentence, it's fine.
okay. I would say, especially earlier in my career, I was so afraid to be a bother to hiring managers. And one CEO, one time I called him, I was like, I am so sorry. I was like, I just wanted an update on this. And he's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. You were like on the list of things for me to do. I'm so glad you reached out. So I remember sharing this with my team. I was like, you're not a bother. Are you actually helping out when people are so busy? Just giving them a quick call or sending a quick email. You're not a bother. You're actually helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure this would be very beneficial for listeners of our podcast. The final one, the future of recruiting belongs to leaders who
Can build partnerships.
Well, thank you, Laura, for such an insightful conversation. It was very good to learn about you and how you do. I have interacted with many founders, recruiting company founders, and you are truly a different in terms of the way you are doing business, the way you are passionate about helping and supporting your clients. And one theme which is constantly coming is that recruiting is ultimately a relationship based business. Great recruiters just don't understand the job description. They understand people, culture, and the hiring managers or leaders that they are supporting. As AI continues to disrupt our industries, the human judgment, human elements will still prevail. And I hope that today's conversation encourages our leaders, recruiters to think differently about what exceptional recruiting really looks like. Again, Laura, thank you for joining us, sharing your experience with our audience. And to everyone listening, if this episode makes an impact on you, please share, like our episode, as well as share with a recruiting manager or hiring manager or anyone in your network to whom this episode will benefit. And if you're a founder and a small to medium enterprise owner, connect with Laura to fill up your positions that you have been struggling. I'm very confident that those positions will be in safe hands.
Thank you so
Until
much for the conversation. I really appreciate your feedback and your insights. I think especially some coming from you, for somebody with your level of expertise and experience and someone who has talked to so many recruiters. Again, I truly appreciate it.
all right. Thank you. Until next time, keep building the great teams, keep challenging the thinking, and keep listening to the Staffing Truth. Thank you. Bye now. Thank you for joining us on the Staffing Truth. Before I let you go, I'd like to ask one favor. If this episode resonated with you, please share with a colleague, a leader, or a friend in the staffing industry. That's how we grow this community and bring more important conversations to the forefront. And if you know a staffing leader whose story, lessons, or leadership journey deserve to be heard, please send them our way. Because the future of our industry won't be shaped by technology alone, but by the leaders behind it. Thank you again for listening to us. I'm Rahul Karan Sharma, and you are listening to The Staffing Truth. Have a great rest of the day.